Hi, this is Russell Stannard from teachertrainingvideos.com. This is a re-recording of a webinar I gave about readers and reading. It's going to suggest to you some ideas around how you could get your students to do more reading, both in the class and outside of the class. I'm going to show you some great free websites with some content that you can use, and there's a special offer if you watch the video where you can download 3 free readers as well as access loads and loads of videos and help around reading and encouraging students to read. So really hope you like the video. Let's get straight into it. So the title of the talk was, or of the presentation, was Readers and Reading. I don't normally do free webinars. Obviously all my YouTube videos are free. I don't do free webinars simply because that's the way I make my money. I make the YouTube videos for free, but obviously if people want me to present, then normally I charge for that. But very kindly Black Cat offered to sponsor my talk, and so this meant that actually I was able to offer a free presentation or a free webinar to all the people on teachertrainingvideos.com. And in fact, this is going to be one of 3. We've got 3 free webinars coming up over the next 6 weeks, and I will be telling you more about those in the future. What I'm going to do in this talk is I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of reading. I'm not going to make this very theoretical. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've done myself with my students. When I think back over my teaching and when I first started teaching, which was back in 1987 was my first job on the island of Greece, on the island of Crete in Greece. When I think back about my teaching, I'm not sure how effective I was as a teacher, but one thing I did very quickly get into the whole idea of encouraging my students to read, and the reason for that is that I was using reading a lot in my own language learning, and I realized that it was really helping me. So I did very early on, perhaps after about 3 years, I started to use readers a lot in my own teaching and learning, and I still do it to this day. Now I don't teach languages anymore, I only do teacher training, but I do use readers in my own language learning, so that I'm going to throw out some of my ideas. I'm also going to focus on some interesting websites with free reading material with audio, as well as show you some interesting ideas around using Google Translate and Quizlet, which I know when I did the presentation last night, a lot of people were really surprised they didn't realize that you can do that. So hopefully you're going to find that useful as well. So why should we read? Well, I think in many cases really it's quite obvious, and we kind of intuitively understand that reading leads to greater vocabulary, better diction, normally better communication as well. What reading really does is helps us to understand the meaning of a word. We see the word being used in different contexts, and we become clearer and clearer about its meaning. And it's when a word becomes clear to us that we can then begin to activate it. Up until then, it might be a word that we understand passively, but until we really understand what the word means, sometimes we're not going to risk using it when we're trying to speak, particularly in a foreign language. The other thing about reading, and I'll talk about this in a bit more detail in a minute, is that it activates a lot of our passive vocabulary. And again, that's kind of connected to the first point. So we're seeing language in context, we're seeing words being used. We get more sure about what they mean because we come across them in our reading, and that allows us therefore to move vocabulary that might be in our passive list of words that we understand but we don't necessarily use ourselves, and come into our active vocabulary that we can actually use. And we have this same process happening in our L1 as well. So there will be many more words, for example in English in my case, that I hear and understand but I don't necessarily use myself. The more I read, the more likely I am to use those words. So reading is really important. The other thing about reading that I notice a lot is that it really helps you to process language. When you're reading, you read a page of a book, it might be 600 words, so you're processing 600 words of the language that you're trying to learn, and I find that really helpful at the moment with Polish, and I'll show you in a minute my Polish readers. But just the process of reading, of activating all of that vocabulary and reminding me of all the words that are in my kind of active or passive vocabulary in Polish. It just simply means I'm processing it all as well. It helps with spelling. Now, I think in English that's particularly important because we often actually visualize words, so you can almost think about the last two things together. Sometimes when I'm thinking of a word in Polish, I actually see the letters of it. Sometimes I think of an image, sometimes I think of the sound, sometimes I think of a combination of those things. But I think that it can help a lot with spelling, and I think in English that's particularly relevant. But it happens to me in other languages as well. I mean, I speak fairly good Spanish, not bad French, and now I'm learning Polish, and I certainly find that it really helps. So those are some of the reasons why I'd really encourage, or why I encourage students to read. So I really love this little kind of diagram or image about active and passive vocabulary. You know, you can use a word, well, it's part of your active vocabulary. You know the word, but you don't use it, it's part of your passive. Can you transfer more words from your passive to active? Does reading play a role in that? I do believe it does, and I think that is a way to think about it. And it's also really important because in a way what we're trying to do when we read, and particularly when we're focusing on readers, is not necessarily add so many words into our passive vocabulary. More, we want to transfer words into our active, and that's a really important point. And there is a difference, and we're going to just talk about that now. So when I'm talking about reading as well, one thing I'm talking about is I'm looking really at reading readers or reading long pieces of text, not for language analysis, not for the type of thing that we sometimes do in course books where we take a text and then we try to extract language from it or work out tendencies in the language, identify grammar. I'm not looking at it like that. I'm thinking really about what we sometimes call extensive reading, simply just reading for pleasure, reading for fluency. Now, I do this, and I've done this a lot in my own language learning, and one thing I've realized is it's really important that whatever I'm reading is actually quite easy. So if I pick up a book and start reading it and I realize, no, there's loads of vocabulary here that I'm going to have to look up, and it's in it and I'm stopping all the time, I'm not really interested. I'm always looking to read things that allow me to read really fluently and just to kind of read through them and process as much vocabulary as possible. So we need to distinguish between those two things. So we're always looking at stuff that's easy, hence the reason I really like the readers. I mean, I've got some of my Polish readers here in front of me that I use, and these are really simple. They're actually slightly below my level, so I can read them really with quite a lot of fluency. And there might only be perhaps in each chapter or in each story that I read, maybe just a handful of words, maybe 5 or 6 words that I don't know. That's exactly what I want to do, because I want to just process language as much as possible. So we're not looking at language in terms of focusing on the text and extracting from it and using it for what I call language work. No, what we're trying to do is encourage this process of extensive reading and processing and working with the language and being working with a text that we feel very comfortable working with. Now, whenever I do teacher training, and I teach on a couple of master's degree programs and run various courses, one thing I realised, well, I can't say this about many things, but one thing I realised about when I was introducing reading to my students that I did do right is that I always contextualized books before we kind of read them, and I always linked the reading that I wanted the students to do at home with what we were going to do in the class. So I just want to talk first of all about bringing a book to life. Now, it's not always easy to do this, but it can be all sorts of things that you might do. You might focus on the author. You might do even a summary or a basic skeleton of the story first and tell people before they even read the story the basic context of the story, or even the basic skeleton of the story. You might focus on some of the characters in the story. You might focus on the context, the historical context of when the story, or where the story is situated. So for example, did it take place during the Second World War, or did it take place in the Tudor period, or did it whatever? So setting up some sort of context. Now these days, to do this has become a lot more interesting, because we can actually go onto YouTube and find out about authors, or find out the basic stories, but the basic summary of a story. We can find out about the characters in the story, or even get a bit of background to the historical context of when the book was written. Let's say you're looking at Charles Dickens and you're looking therefore at Victorian Britain, that kind of thing. And I tended to do things like that. I often in the old days used to focus on the actual image on the front page, and even use that as a starting point, or maybe try to find out a little bit of information about the author and use that as a way of kind of generating an interest. Now there are some really interesting free materials on the internet that we can use, and I'm going to show you these now, with lots of tips and ideas that we can use for kind of setting a bit of context to our readers. Okay, so this is one thing I'm suggesting to you almost before the students start to read the book. Generate a bit of interest in it. There's lots of things you could do. You could even give students a selection of books and make a decision as a class which book you're going to read. But it's well worth kind of setting up a bit of context. And the other thing about that context, it's really worth explaining to students why reading is so important. I can't emphasize how helpful it is if you're a student and you understand why you're doing something and what the benefits are. So I'm going to show you this website, and it's this free stuff. It's completely free, and it's a load of material that Black Cat have put together, and you could use that material or take the ideas and apply it to the book or the article that you decide to read. And we'll be looking at the actual what are we going to read a bit later on. So there's loads of free material, and I will be sharing this in the description. And for those of you that attended the talk it was on the 6th of May, then I will also be sharing a kind of handout with all these links as well. But this website, and you can just focus on the actual address there at the top, has got loads of kind of stuff that we could use to set the context of a book that we might want to get our students to read. Let's just have a quick look, because there's so much stuff here. I'll start with the catchy English. We can click here, and you can see we've got all sorts of books that they're focusing on. These are obviously the books that Black Cat must be selling. But if we click, for example, on Gulliver's Travels, we get this little video that we could use if we were going to perhaps read Gulliver's Travels. Then we might use this as a way to set the context for reading the book. This is what I'm suggesting. As I said, you could look at the author, you could look at the background story. There's all sorts of things that you could work with, and this might be a really good place to get an inspiration for ideas that you might want to use to contextualize a book. I'm just going to play a little bit of the video.
This is more than just a place where we live. Our houses, our neighbourhoods, our cities and our homes are not only built with bricks, they are built of stories too. We must take care of our homes because they are at risk of being destroyed by us, the people who created them.
We need to make our cities, our homes safe.
Okay, so what I'm just trying to say is you'd have to go through this material. There's so much, I really couldn't spend the whole of this presentation going through this material, but I've been looking at a lot of this stuff. Number one, I love it because it's free, but I also like it because I think, if I was teaching in class now, I would be looking at maybe using some of this stuff to contextualize the book that I might want to read. Let's have a look at this one of Oliver Twist here, for example.
Please, sir, can I have some more? More? No, you can't have any more. Oliver Twist is hungry. In fact, Oliver Twist is starving. If you say starving, it means really hungry.
So I'd really suggest that you look at some of this material. There's absolutely masses of it. Really are loads of different sections of free resources here, and I would have a good look round here. So there's lots of things that you could possibly use as an introduction into getting your students to read. And when we thinking in a minute about, well, what do we get our students to read? Do we start straight away with a book, or do we maybe start with just reading some stuff that's on the internet that we want to encourage the students to make use of? Now, it's also worth thinking about what we're actually trying to do when it comes to readers. I'm going to talk a little bit more in a minute about what I do when I'm working with a reader and I'm getting my students to read, okay? But, you know, our ultimate goal here is to encourage students to read, to help them to understand more about why reading is so useful to language learning. And really, in doing so, what we're really hoping is that they'll start reading more on their own. I think that ultimately is our goal. If we can start to get our students to really make the effort to read and understand why reading is so important, then it's going to help them to become more autonomous, become more effective learners, and that really is what we want to do. And so you've got to keep that in mind as a general goal when you're introducing readers into the class. Now, what I want to do now is talk not about how I contextualize a book, but actually what I do with my students when they're reading. So the first thing I'm saying about reading is that I would contextualize whatever book I decided that we were going to read as a class, or I may even give the students some options. Obviously, there will be teachers and students in a situation where they can't necessarily buy a book, okay, and so I'm going to be showing you in a minute where you can also find some free material. But what we are going to try and set a context for what we're going to do, and then we're going to try and get our students at home to read. Remember, we've chosen a book that's easy, and what we want to do is link that into the lesson. So when they come into class, and this was something I really did a lot, I would give my students, let's say I've asked them to read chapter 1 of the book, I would then put them into groups at the beginning of the lesson and maybe give them a series of questions to discuss, or maybe some true or false statements about that chapter of the book, and then they have to agree or disagree and say why. Or maybe I got them to focus on some of the characters in the book, okay, and discuss some questions around the characters. Or maybe I even get them to do things like predict, well, what's going to happen in chapter 2, etc. So I'm linking the reading that their students are doing at home with what I want them to do in the class, and I'm not necessarily giving them that much to read at home. It really might just start with a few pages. Now, it's very likely that some of your students won't do the homework, particularly at the beginning. This is a process. This is something that you've got to believe in and say, I really want to get my students involved in reading, and I'm therefore going to accept that maybe at the beginning only a few are going to do it. But hopefully you put them into groups, 1 or 2 haven't done it, but the rest have, and then they can discuss the questions. And there are a few other tips. Another little thing you can do is keep a record. So you could, particularly with young learners, this can work really well, and you can even have some kind of badging system, is keep a record of what books students have read and what chapters they've completed, etc. Obviously, remember, our goal in the long run is to encourage students to become independent and start reading on their own. But at the beginning, it's probably something that we, at the beginning, might want to control because we're trying to encourage them. But that link between what the students do at home, in other words, read, and what we're going to get them to do with that reading material. And then we're going to do things like focus on the vocabulary related to a particular chapter. Now, hopefully, if we've chosen a book well, that's only going to be 5 or 6 or 7, maybe 8 words. There's not going to be so many words that the students are going to have difficulty with, because we're trying to choose books that are easy, and that means that hopefully very quickly they can learn those words. And I will show you a couple of tips in a minute with how you can get them to study the vocabulary. When I was teaching, and particularly at first certificate level, the students, if they read a book and it was one of the books that was in the first certificate exam, that also meant that they could write about that particular book in the exam, and they could also discuss it as well. There was also that option. So that was one of the interesting things. Now, I don't actually know whether that's the case anymore, but it did used to be the case, and that was also one of my inspirations for bringing readers into my lessons. Now, there's absolutely masses of reading material on the internet. I'm going to show you a website called Listen a Minute. And I particularly like this website because it's really easy. If we click here, let's choose this topic, calories. Okay, obviously close the ad. We get to some reading material, and what we get here is an article to read. Okay, and we also get the audio file. So this could be the sort of thing, if you didn't want to start with a reader, or if you couldn't really get your students to buy a reader, you could look at some of this free material that's available on the internet. Okay, and this is a particularly nice website in terms of it's kind of quite simple. You can play the audio, so if I click here we can actually listen to the audio.
Listenaminute.com. Calories. Do you ever think about or worry about the number of calories you eat and drink every day?
So immediately you can see that you can listen and read at the same time, and this is something that I do in Polish all the time. I absolutely love this option because it really helps me to read better, to listen to the pronunciation, to link it all together. Now in this particular website there's a couple of great games that the students can do afterwards. So once they've obviously listened and read the text, and this could be for homework, they can click on quiz 1, and in quiz 1 what they have to do is try to rebuild the whole text. So in that particular one there it would be, do you ever, so start with C, do you ever think about or worry about the number of calories you eat and drink every day? Okay, blah blah blah, and you can build it up. Now I'm getting 100% at the moment. If you get an answer wrong, for example, it's not really, I'm going to click on that one now, then it tells you no, that answer's wrong, and then if I click on that one which is the right answer, then it carries on and it adds it. So it only adds to the text if you get the answer right. So that's a really nice activity. I really like that activity. I always used to use that in the class with my students as well, but that can be a great activity for students to do at home, or you could do it and use that in the class and get the students to work in pairs. It's really interesting if they're working in pairs and try to rebuild the text. There's another nice activity as well. If you go to quiz 2, this is like you can listen to the text. So let's have a quick listen again.
Listenaminute.com. Calories. Do you ever think about or worry about the number of calories you eat and drink every day? It's not really.
So what you could do now is you've got to try to what I normally do is get the students to listen to the text again, and then in groups, but again this could be for homework, get the students to rebuild the text. So that word would be calories, wasn't it? That was definitely in the text. So I'm going to write calories. Yeah, great. I'm going to write and, because I'm sure that's there, and then I'm going to write the, and then I'm going to write think, because I know that was in there, and then about, and I got to try to rebuild the text based on what I've just listened to. So it's a really nice activity because it kind of forces them to think around words around the genre. So here we're looking at calories and food and losing weight. So I'm going to write food because I think that must be in there, and then I'm going to write the word weight because I'm reckoning that might be in there. Okay, and if I get a word wrong, and I'll write my name just to show you, click on check, then it will add that word there at the bottom because obviously that's not in the text. So this is kind of quite a nice website. I really like this, including in terms of encouraging students to read. It's all free, and the other thing is, if you do want to use this in class, you do actually get like a PDF lesson plan for how you could use this. You can click on this and you get like a lesson plan about how to use this particular content in the classroom. But I like using it as well as a way of encouraging students to do reading activities at home. And again, they could read something and then you could have a discussion when they come into the classroom. Remember to link the two parts together. Now this is also quite an interesting website as well. It's the Voice of America site. Now obviously from a political point of view this is very pro-America, etc. But there is some really interesting content here, and I just want to focus on it, particularly at high levels, but also at low levels. The low level stuff tends to be more in the nature of it tends to be more dialogues, but it does allow you to both listen and read. So if I was to jump on and perhaps just watch this video here as an example, if I click here, I've got a video, and the video does also give you the text. So if I click on this,
Oh, important meeting. Everyone must come. Well, back to work, and my boss has called a meeting. I wonder what it's about. Maybe we're all getting raises. Oh, there's Jonathan. Maybe he knows.
Okay, now I do like that because, again, I know it's not, this is a kind of shifting away slightly from reading in this example. Because, I mean, it's still about reading, but obviously it's also about listening and the whole the use of video. But I do like this idea that we can listen and read the text at the same time, and it's something I'm always doing in Polish, and I'm always looking at. I found a great website in Polish called Easy Polish, and I use that all the time. And if we also go to, and you can, there's plenty of material here. If I go to this section on US history, now I have to admit I'm a bit of a fan of you. I'm an enthusiast for US history. I do kind of read books about it and listening to it, but I did like some of this material. I mean, obviously, again, you know, whether or not it would be something that your students would like would depend, of course, on their level. This material is very high level. But what you have got here basically is there's a kind of history of what's called the purchase of Louisiana. And that's when America kind of extended. And you can click on the audio here. And so you can be reading and listening at the same time. So I'm just going to play it quickly.
The U.S. expands west. In 1801, the United States under the Constitution was very young, only about 12 years old. And
I like the way it kind of focuses on the text. It highlights it as it's being read out. Okay, so that you know, that kind of stuff. Now, again, this website's got masses of material, and all I'm suggesting is that maybe if you can't get your students to buy a reader, then this might be an option that they can go onto a website like this and, you know, and start to do reading activities which the students would do at home. And then you can talk about those in the classroom. Obviously, it would depend again on the level of the students. Remember, one thing I'm trying to encourage here is kind of extensive reading. So reading something not for language analysis, but for pleasure and for processing language. Now, the ideas that I'm going to suggest now are going to be a little bit controversial because I am actually a fan of translation, and I don't believe in this idea that you know, we don't translate. I think naturally at the beginning when we're learning a language we translate it, but as we process the language more and more and more, we translate less and less and less as we get more familiar with the language. And again, how do we get familiar with the language? Well, we read a lot. So my belief is that it's not really something we can force on people. It actually happens. So I'm not scared of translation, and I'm going to show you some of the ideas that I use. But a point I want to make, and let me just sort of open up one of these books just to kind of highlight what I mean. If I go to one of the stories, say, that I've read recently in one of these books, okay, I'm just going to grab the last one that I read. This is a perfect example. If you look on the screen, and hopefully I'm putting that in the right place so you can see it, you'll notice that I mark the words that I don't understand. And actually there's not many of them because the level of the book is always, or the article that I'm reading, I try to read things that are simple, but I'm still going to look these words up. So my technique is to read the book first all the way through and just underline the words but not stop, and then go back and look the words up so I then understand them when I normally write on the side of the book the answer. And then those words that new words, I will then put them into Google Translate and play around with them. And what I want to show you now is exactly what I do in Google Translate, because it's something quite specific and it links into Quizlet, because Google Translate and Quizlet connect together. So I'm going to focus on that now. Okay, so let me try and explain how I use Google Translate and how I then connect it to Quizlet. As I said, you may not agree with this idea. It certainly works for me. I'm going to click here and I'm going to choose Google Translate. And what I'm going to do first of all is I'm actually going to imagine, you know, that I've just read a chapter of my story and there's a few words in Polish that I don't understand. So I'm going to look up this word. So there's one word here that I just don't understand. So I'm actually really authentically looking in my list here and I've just seen the word leniwy. Now, what I now do is that I'm going to switch that over. Okay, and I'm now going to write a really simple sentence with lazy, okay? Because what I want to do is I want to learn the word leniwy, but I don't want to learn it on its own. I want to learn it in context, okay? So I'm going to say, it's going to be a simple sentence. When I was young, I was lazy. Okay, and I can see now that sentence in Polish. Now, I try to really make the sentences easy so that I can understand the Polish. But what I really want here is to make sure that when I'm learning a new word, which is the word leniwy, that I'm learning that word in context. Now, if my level was really low, I might write a sentence like, I am a lazy boy. I try to write sentences that I kind of know that I'm going to understand more or less in Polish. But obviously what I'm trying to practice here is the word here. Now what I do, and I always have Polish first and then after, is that I then click here and add that word to my list of sentences in Polish that I want to learn. Actually, I've got that wrong. I always have the English first and then the Polish afterwards. But if I click here below now, I will see the sentences that I currently want to learn. And I've got all of the sentences in English and then in Polish, in English and then in Polish, in English then in Polish. And this now, and this is the brilliant thing, and I can listen to those sentences, so I can actually click here and listen to the sentence.
Jestem leniwym chłopcem.
Okay, and practice them.
Poszedłeś do stacji benzynowej.
But what I can also do, and this is really clever, is that I can now upload that list straight into Quizlet so that I can practice studying and working with that new vocabulary that I want to work with and that I want to learn. So to do that, all I need to do is click here and then click here. And what that does is it creates a kind of basically like a spreadsheet of the new words, and I'm just going to make the boxes nice and clear, so I always move them out so that I've just got two boxes. I'm not interested in this stuff here, I just want these words here in the middle. What I'm going to do now is click here and then using my keyboard just going to move across to the other side, just using the arrow key and holding down the shift, and then I'm going to copy those words. Now another way you can do this is just simply do it like this, just hold down and just copy. But what you want to do is you want to copy those words. Now I'm going to jump over to Quizlet. So we're now on Quizlet and I'm going to click on Create, Study Set. And I'm going to give this a name. So I'm going to call this New, or let's just say it's connected to the story in my book that I'm reading at the moment called Balkon. And today is the 7th of May. Okay. I'm just going to write here New Words. And then all I do is I click here and I just paste in all of those sentences, and immediately those sentences are added in, and you can see it creates the cards immediately for me. And if I click on import now, there they are. I've got all those words now imported in. And sometimes you have to click here and just kind of make sure, if you click here and just make sure that it picks up English is the language on that side and Polish is the language on that side. Just make sure, if you just click on the first one, it will kind of activate it. Sometimes it doesn't activate otherwise. And that's it now. I can click on create. And now I can start playing these sentences, working with these sentences. And normally what I do is if I click on flashcards, I start by listening to the sentence in Polish and then translating it into English, and then after a while I try to do it the other way around. So what I'll do now is click on options, I'll turn the audio on, and I come down to advanced, and I'm going to turn the audio off for English but on for Polish, and I can even have it slow, and sometimes I use that in Polish. So I click here. Now
Jestem leniwym chłopcem.
so I can say I am a lazy boy. Now let me check if I got that right. Next sentence.
Poszedłeś do stacji benzynowej.
Okay, so I think this means you went to the petrol station. Okay, this is the way that I work. Now I know some people are not going to agree with me. I know that there are problems with this technique. Sometimes the translations in Google Translate are not perfect. I do realize that. But if you're asking me, does this help me? The answer is it helps me enormously because I get exposed to the sentences.
Poszła do ratusza.
Okay, so in this case that would be she went to the town hall. Okay, lovely. For me personally, this is a lovely way of working. And if I, just to kind of make a point here, and I know you're not all going to agree with me, but if I come back to my study sets, you'll see that I'm doing this all the time. I have hundreds of study sets that I'm working with, okay? And I'm working with, and you notice what I tend to do is actually put the date as well of the new words that I'm currently studying. And a lot of these words will be coming
Poszła do
from...
ratusza.
A lot of these words will be coming from the readers that I'm reading. And then I often go back after I've studied the words and read the same article again. That is a lovely idea. You might agree or you might not agree with it, but I find it really helpful for me, and it was certainly something that I did encourage my students to do when I was teaching. Okay, so that was really a talk a lot based on my experience, not too theoretical. But of course, a lot of the things I'm saying we do know are true. I guess one of the most important things that I'm trying to say is you've got to link it together. If you're going to get your students to read and to read at home, you've got to bring the book or the articles or whatever you're asking them to read into the class and do activities around them. It's also a really good idea to contextualize the reading, particularly if you're reading a book. Bring the book to life if you can. Make use of all the content now that's on YouTube, and make use of all that great content that Black Cat have put up for free. Now, a last couple of things. First of all, this isn't the last free talk that I'm going to be organising. I will be running 2 more free talks over this period in May and June of 2021. And secondly, we've got a great offer that Black Cat will allow us to access 3 free readers for a period of, I think, 30 days, and you could look at making use of those readers with your students. So let me just show you the offer and then talk very quickly about the other 2 presentations that I've got coming up over the next couple of weeks. So you will need to register, and I do believe if you click here you will need to register first of all. So you will need to provide this information. Once you've registered, you can then add the code in that will allow you to access 3 books for free. So once you've registered, you'll come to a page like this, and here you just need to put in that code, and the code is capital letters, my name, Russell 21. And I do believe if you click on start your trial, it will allow you to access 3 books for free. And here are your books. Now, I'm really pleased to announce that I'm actually going to be doing 2 more free webinars. That is 2 more webinars that will be accessible to anyone who has signed up to my newsletter. So if you sign up to the newsletter, you will get information about these webinars. There's going to be one on video, and there's going to be one on games and activities for teaching English. But in fact, again, it can be for any language. So if you are interested and you want to get the information about these 2 additional webinars that I will be running in the next 6 weeks, so one is going to be at the end of May and one's in June, please make sure that you've signed up to the newsletter, because I will be sharing that information through the newsletter. And thank you very much.